Good afternoon. Hello. I'm Mackenzie Glenn-Zajali, Senior Enrichment Program Director with the Wisconsin Alumni Association. On behalf of our organization and the Office of Multicultural Arts Initiative, our program partner, we are so honored to have all of you here with us tonight. Thank you for being here. We are thrilled to have a Wisconsin Idea Spotlight program in person and recorded for those who couldn't join us in person tonight to be shared out later. Arts is Activism to kick off the 15th annual Line Breaks Festival. We've missed seeing so many of you in person, so truly it's an honor to see all of you in person. Thank you. Before we begin our program, I have a couple of quick announcements. Out of respect for our guests and panelists, please take this moment to silence your phone or turn it off and enjoy the evening. Also, please acknowledge with me that the Wisconsin Alumni Association and UW-Madison are situated upon traditional territories. The Wisconsin Alumni Association respects the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with the 11 other First Nations of Wisconsin. We have an incredible panel of UW-Madison alumni and faculty with us tonight. In fact, I should move so you can see them. As well as DJ Payne 1, who is playing during the reception. Dr. LaVar Charleston will be moderating our panel and sharing more on our esteemed panelists in a moment. Before I turn it over to him, I'd like to share some exciting news with all of you. Danez Smith and Erika Dickerson-Despenza, two of our alumni speakers, were just named Wisconsin Alumni Association Forward Award recipients. This prestigious award celebrates alumni within 15 years of graduation for their achievements. A formal announcement is forthcoming, but we really wanted to take this moment to celebrate in community with all of you, these two very distinguished alumni. So please, join me in. Congratulations. All right. So again, our moderator, Dr. LaVar Charleston, is the Elsie Higginbottom Director of the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Educational Achievement, and the Chief Diversity Officer at UW-Madison, where he leads the UW's efforts to create a diverse, inclusive, and successful learning and work environment for all students, faculty, staff, alumni, and program partners. He also holds the titles of Deputy Vice Chancellor for Diversity and Inclusion and Vice Provost. He's also a double badger and also a Forward Under 40 Wisconsin Alumni Association award recipient.
That was a while ago. I'm over 40 now.
Dr. Charleston, the mic is yours.
Awesome.
Thank you.
And that was a while ago, but I could go back if you all want me to. I don't know. Over 40. I am so honored to be here. A few of my colleagues have been thanking me for being here. And I'm like, wait, what? I'm on the stage with these brilliant human beings. I'm like, it's my honor. I'm not worthy. So thank you all for being here. And thank you, Mackenzie, and everyone who assisted from WFAA and First Wave and the division and everybody else who had a part in making this happen. I'm so grateful to be here. It's not often we have an opportunity to sit with individuals who are, I think, thought leaders, not just here, but across the world as it relates to arts and activism, whose work has embodied this and have impacted so many people. So as we think about these individuals who just happen to be integral members of the First Wave family, we know and recognize that the impact that First Wave has to do something, has to have some sort of a reason and rationale for enabling you all to sort of assist us in realizing our potential as it relates to arts and activism. And so each individual here has had an intricate component or a contribution to First Wave. And so we want to get into some of that here in a moment, but I will first introduce each panelist. Danez Smith is a Black queer Paz Award-winning author, artist, and performer from. Wait, so let me stop. Let me stop again. Oh, Lord. So, I'm only going to say a piece, and if you all want to know the full impact of these individuals, all you got to do is Google them. It's phenomenal with the impact for this world. So I'm just going to give you a tidbit of some of the impact that they have had. Danez is an artist and performer from St. Paul, Minnesota. They have been an emerging force in the movement since they became a member of the inaugural student cohort of UW's First Wave, graduating in 2012. Among their many outstanding honors, Smith authored Don't Call Us Dead in 2017. Yeah, y'all know the word. And Homie in 2020. Yes, that was good too. They have won the Ford Prize for Best Collection and was a National Book Award finalist, along with the Kate Tufts Discovery Award, the Lambda Literary Award for Gay Poetry, and has been the recipient of dozens of fellowships, including the National Endowment for the Arts. All the fellowships. Yes. Smith's work has been featured widely appearing on platforms such as BuzzFeed, the New York Times, PBS NewsHour, Best American Poetry, Poetry Magazine, and The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, to say a few. Yeah. So next I'll introduce my sister Erika Dickerson-Despenza, who is a Black queer feminist and award-winning poet, playwright, and cultural memory worker from Chi-Town, Chicago, Illinois. I'm guessing there are a few other people from Chicago here.
West Side.
Her prolific career was foreshadowed with the undergraduate production in Zaki Sange's For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Suicide, When the Rainbow Is Enough, and the launch of the UW Madison Theater Company called the For Colored Girls Project. She is a First Wave 2014 alumna who has undertaken the exploration of social justice and activism through film and on stage to new heights, from the New York stage to the San Francisco Playhouse Lorraine Hansberry Theater. With more than, serious, right? With more than a dozen prestigious playwright awards, film and theater and fellowships, and commissioned projects to her credit, Dickerson-Despenza is developing a 10-play Katrina cycle, including Hieroglyph and Shadowland, focused on the effects of Hurricane Katrina and its state-sanctioned man-made disaster rippling in and beyond New Orleans. Let's give her a round of applause. And last but certainly not least, the man, the myth, the legend, the person who inspires me is Professor Chris Walker. Professor Walker is the director of the Division of the Arts at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He is a professor in the dance department and the founding artistic director of the First Wave program in the Office of Multicultural Arts. Professor Walker creates contemporary dance, theater, and performance artwork rooted in the visual and performance culture of the African diaspora. He works in the disciplines of dance, theater, film, video, and is internationally known for performance and his research in the pedagogy and teaching academics through the interweaving of arts, activism, and real-life experience. So I'm excited today to be on stage. He's all that, and I'm like sitting here, I'm like, okay, well, hi, I'm here. Excited to be on stage and engage in a conversation, really a fascinating discussion about arts and activism with these brilliant scholar activist artists here. And so I'm going to start by asking a few questions, and I may engage the audience intermittently, and I'll probably end with a question for all of you. As we think about hip hop festivals, particularly in the Midwest, you cannot say any of that without thinking about line breaks. It's a space for the cultivation and presentation of work by first wave artists, and it's something that we all who is interested in this work look forward to every year, right? As we think about first wave and the history therein, I don't know that first wave would be first wave as I mentioned before without you and your contributions. And so I really want, so people hear about these things, they see it on first wave. What is first wave? So I want to ask you a little bit about the history of first wave. And then I also want you to talk about a little bit about how activist scholars can use their voice and share their gifts to make change, because that's what first wave does. And we see it in the brilliant artistry of our other panelists here. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Wonderful introduction. I'm sitting here with palpitations because I'm proud, I'm excited. Lots of students who have had the opportunity to work with over the years are here in the very fully realized adult versions of themselves. And it's a lot. It's so if you hear me tremble and stutter, it's out of character. If I may answer the second half of that first, I think this weekend is a huge part of that conversation about what activism looks like and how in first wave we think of the act of storytelling, the act of sharing creative work as a part of the work of activists, right? Not that every creative work is that. So we'll break that down, hopefully, in today's conversation. But what is first wave? I like to think that I was at the right place at the right time. I came to UW-Madison for a very specific and finite project. And while I was here, I was attending events all across campus. It's a predominantly white institution. I'm Jamaican, so I'm trying to find people that sound like, look like. And so I found myself in a lot of the Office of Multicultural Arts Initiatives events that year. Right? I'm trained in ballet and modern and jazz. So yeah, I go to the theater and I go to opera and I go to all the arts. I love the arts. I grew up in the arts. But I was looking for specific cultural arts activities. And those were all around this white man, white hair, Willie, who had this robust energy, this robust affection and love for the work of people of color from the US, from Central America, from the Caribbean, and he celebrated that work and believed in that work fully. So when I met him as a Jamaican, he spoke to that unflinchingly. And so I started to find more and more of those spaces that he was a part of, bringing in artists of color to diversify the experience that us as faculty, visiting artists, students at UW-Madison could find spaces, right? So Office of Multicultural Arts Initiatives was founded under that concept. And First Wave came out of that. It was really got together a group of folks and he was saying, we have this thing called Youth Speaks. And Youth Speaks Wisconsin is now a part of this national conversation of young people in poetry. But what happens after they graduate high school? And he goes, Chris, can you imagine if we could get a cohort of students who are coming out of that cultural background, right? Who are already doing this phenomenal artwork, who already have this deep love and care for community and family and environment and society. And combining that then with the Research One platform, UW-Madison, we could be shaping world leaders, couldn't we? So that was the conversation. We didn't think that as a group, myself, Willie May, Josh, tons of names are a part of what became the founding of First Wave, right? But we recognized the need for it to be programmatic. That it was the ability for any students that we bring in to be able to take advantage of the different things, right, that they need to build who they are, right? So instead of trying to do everything inside of a mind, we looked at how we built partnerships with programs around campus. For me, curricularly, that meant, how how do we create a curricular experience where students are centered in their voices, but are pushed toward collaboration and the difficulty and the challenges of that, are open to building the relationship and strengthening who they are through those processes. So we pulled from the founding, or what is a part of the theoretic conversation about the founding of hip hop, which is that party that DJ Kool Herc played. Right? If you look at the two turntables, the idea was taking two records of the same song, and when you get to the breakbeat section, just keep switching from turntable to turntable. And in that moment, he extended that beat. So instead of you having just 8 bars to dance on, now that same beat is going for 3 minutes. It created a new space where there wasn't. And in that new space, people could now scratch, right? In that new space, people could now rap. People could take their poetry and put that to rhythm, right? And share those stories. In that new space, dance groups could dance and compete in a different way. In that new space, fashion had to be designed to speak to those ideas. In that new space where there was none, right, was innovation. And so First Wave represents that, right? On our campus, even in this space, right? Or presentation in historical society at UW-Madison. The first concert on the Dobler stage as a historic stage for concert dance, right? Then coming to the Overture Center, right? Presenting in these spaces. All of that was demonstrating that it is possible. Now, this is not so unique anymore because the pandemic has taught that to all of us, that things can shift when we need them to. But those were the core ideas of looking at the culture that we reflect and represent and ask how that can inform how we then build programs, right? So in those rooms, that was the conversation. And then you had the defenders, the cultural defenders was like, but it has to be hip hop. If it is hip hop, it needs to have this. And if it's hip hop, it needs to have that. And if it's community, it needs to be this. And it's those robust conversations that is outside of the conversations that our students have. And then a humility to know that if you're building space where there is none, then you have to allow that space to also teach you about itself. And maybe that also comes from my art practice. So I grew up in Jamaica, very post-colonial British culture, but I grew up in independent Jamaica. So lots of conversation about how our art defined us, separate from British folk. What I didn't realize was how misogyny and other behaviors that were attached to how you are in a certain space translated. Because I then go, well, I'm oppressed in these ways as a gay man in that space. And those were things I didn't think about. Students here challenge me with that. Right? Whereas I was also had certain amount of fears. About my own sexuality, right? Maybe for the first 3 or so years at UW-Madison, 90% of the people I met would never have known that, right? But students here challenge me with that, right? Because for me to be that mentor, I had to be that open and humble. And for me, when we talk about the founding of First Wave, we have to talk about the programmatic element of it, the truly sort of community. When there's a community, the group of people, not an individual, but the group of people who created what the theory of collective centering then emerges out of. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Thank you for that.
True, right?
That's awesome.
A very specific memory.
Very specific memory.
So when we think about, everything you just shared and the impact and the experiences that is First Wave, we know that students who've came out of that tradition have shaped in certain ways. We've been blessed to be able to experience the art of Erika Danez. And, when you think of folks who are so profound in their artwork. We tend to think as onlookers, as consumers of that art, we tend to think of ourselves as, or we tend to sort of envision knowing these individuals. But it's not very often that we have an opportunity to have those individuals here before us, like right now. So my next question is for Erika and Danez, and it's really thinking about your work, and we want you to talk about your work a little bit, but we also want to hear about your story. Much of the work we assume that you've been impacted either personally or experienced through someone else around sort of the foundations and the outputs of your stories, of your art, whatever form that may be. But we are blessed to have you here right now. So we want to hear from your lips the story of yourselves, and tell us a little bit about your work too.
Okay.
You can skip the parts. No.
I know. Well, I feel, at least in terms of thinking about the relationship between arts and activism, I feel very lucky to have come to poetry and to theater, which is my first love, through some radical traditions, right? I think some of the first theater, I was very lucky to have a teacher in high school that was teaching us through the lens of Augusta Boal's Theater of the Oppressed, right? So there's always a sense of community, of actual outcome and possibility from the prospect of art, right? And that what you put in front of community has the potential to change that community, to affect them, to bottle their experiences and reflect it back to them. I feel very lucky to be, I don't know if I'm a hip hop practitioner, but I feel like a child of hip hop. To me, that means much more than aesthetic and genre. That means a political awareness, right? That hip hop is a art that was born out of resistance, that was born out of witness, that was born out of a burning Bronx, right? And a need to have a scream underneath all that pain that was happening at a time in New York and across the country. There's a reason why that genre spread like wildfire, why it gets picked up in international communities. It speaks to the oppressed, right? I felt very lucky to come into poetry through a lens of spoken word, which necessitates community, right? You cannot be a spoken word artist alone. It requires gathering, it requires community, it requires witness, right? But it also requires that you have something to say once you get up there, right? That you're not wasting people's time. And so there was always this sense of being indebted energetically to the audience, right? And also, I was a baby poet in the times of the Iraq War, right? So I think a lot of us were being activated in a way, right? I mean, I don't think you could hear a poem in 2005 without having "fuck Bush" somewhere in there. Excuse my language, or don't. But there was this great political awareness, I think, amongst young people at the time, and here was this genre that mentors and other folks in our life were affirming that was a vessel for us to be able to say these things, right? So I feel that the personal and the political have always sort of intertwined for me from the very beginning. Coming to First Wave, I mean, getting to study under Chris and Rafael Casal was just like an sorry, I just had a flashback of push-ups and wall sits and other things. Don't say that. It was a humbling experience. I think I still carry so much of Chris's sort of notes about how to follow process and not perfection, right? Like you sort of are working on it up until the moment just to get it right, that you're thinking about how the audience is being transformed, what they're going to come out of that to the talk back when they walk out of the theater, what are they going to be leaving with? How are you leaving with instruction, with inspiration, with just some bit of knowledge, some bit of something to go back and transform their own worlds, whether that be the community or their personal lives. And so there is a great weight to being an artist. And I think that's what I've learned from First Wave, that there is no such thing as art for art's sake, right? That I cannot waste my audience's time, that this art actually does move, as I was moved and saved many a time by the artists that I've looked up to in my life. And so now I feel like I'm creating in a way where there is a responsibility to the person on the other side of the microphone, on the other side of the page, thinking about how, like I always say, I want my art to be useful, right? And for me, that means I want art that creates, that facilitates liberation for Black people, for queer people, for trans folks, right? Art that encourages resistance. What does cold mean, Erica? I'm about to use the word cold. Does that mean to stop?
Which cold?
Like to cold, like I want to call something.
C-A.
Yeah.
Cold.
Is that bad?
It's not bad, but
It's a straight point moment.
Yeah, I'm trying to get the words right. Right, but that art is an actual tool of like summoning a greater world, right? That it is manifestation, and I'm trying to use that for the manifestation of liberation in a lot of ways. So that's, I guess, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Erica, you go now.
I think I want to just start by saying I'm so happy to be here. I don't come to UW often. Sophia is my sister, and I miss her deeply in New York. You go from seeing someone 3-4 times a week to calling them and being like, "How's Wisconsin treating you?" So it's a joy to be back and with you. I think a lot about two particular quotes by radical Black feminists and womanists. One is by Caribbean communist badass Claudia Jones, who died in exile. And while Claudia did not primarily identify as an artist, she had remarked that the genesis of the people's freedom is their art. And I love that she was very particular in saying genesis, right? Like a beginning.
Yes.
Right? Not the destination, not art is freedom, but like the genesis of a people's freedom is their art. And the other thing I think about a lot, the other quote is Auntie Toni K. Bambara. And she's often misquoted, right? You probably have seen, maybe even posted, retweeted the whole an artist's duty or an artist's job is to make revolution irresistible. If you've seen or tweeted or whatever that, just raise your hand. I just want to see how familiar we are, right? Okay, some of y'all lying didn't raise your hand, but that's okay. Because you're like, I don't know what she's going to say. Did I do something wrong? So I'm not going to raise my hand. It's fine, but the actual interview that she has with Kay Bonetti in the late 80s. It's a very rare interview for you. You can't find the audio, but if you buy the Conversations with Toni K. Bambara, I will reference a lot of books over the course of this time. So just know that. But if you get that collection of interviews with Toni K. Bambara, you'll see that the actual question she's asked is, well, what is an artist's duty? And her answer is actually about cultural work. And I think that in the reinterpretation and the new verbiage of that quote, we lose that, right? So my bio says like, yeah, I'm a playwright because that is by trade what I do. It is the vehicle that I am using to make calls to action specifically for the liberation of Black queer women and femmes. Specifically, because the Combahee River Collective told us, right, that in 77, if Black women were free, that would mean all people would be free because our freedom necessitates the destruction of every oppressive system, right? So that is my, those are the people who name me, right? Black queer women, those are my immediate communities. And so when Toni K. Bambara says, well, the role of the cultural worker is to make the revolution irresistible, that means something different to me than just artists, because I can make work that is inciting no change, and I can make work that is very status quo, and I can make work that gets me on Broadway, but that means nothing to my people on the west side of Chicago, right? And so when I think about my journey, and I talked to Chris about this a while ago when he surprised me in New York and came to a very early reading of the play that went on at the Lorraine Hansberry Theater in 2021. But I think my work has always been trying to expand the notion of what interiority in Black queer women's lives looks like, and exploring Black queer girlhood and from a Black queer feminist lens. And so in doing that and not having a lot of examples of that, right, like as I'm developing at UW and deepening my politics, right, organizing back home in Chicago with what were at the time baby formations of BYP 100 and the Let Us Breathe Collective and Assata's Daughters, right? Like they were baby formations. They were not these nationally known organizations yet. I think about how similar I found First Wave to be to organizing communities. And so while I do readily recognize myself as an activist, which in my learning is defined as a person who advocates for a cause. I am a community organizer, and those are different. And in our culture right now, they're really conflated. Like, oh yeah, I'm an activist, because everybody can be an activist, and we all should be, right? There are causes that everyone in this room care about, and you can take individual action. You can write the poem, you can sign the petition, you can show up to the protest. But organizers build leaders, right? And we are actually accountable to community. And I define community as the people who name me, right? The people who I got to go back to and face, right? And I get that also from Toni K. Bambara, because she says, well, you know, I speak to the people who name me. And so that's my Black community in Harlem. And she goes on to talk about the people who name her. And so I think my entire life's work in art is framed around that idea. So when I come to First Wave and we're like in the trenches of challenge, and I don't even know if I like my cohort member over here, and like, girl, that was a bad poem, and like, I don't even do hip hop, I'm a page poet, you know, at the time that was a thing. Like,
You've come a long way.
but some of y'all write better because I said it, right? Like, right? But that's not shade, right? No, it's not. It's not. You know what I'm saying? Like, because some people were so concerned with trying to prove me wrong that they could actually write well versus just emote on stage, right? Just perform it versus actually, no, I can actually do it on the page because literature lasts. And this is the thing that I think, for me, I, as a person who also did not identify as a hip hop artist and was kind of like, how did I get in this program? Was that the idea that literature lasts. Like, if we look at through time, no matter what video archives are gone, literature lasts. So what we do on the page matters. And how we witness and are witnessed on stage then comes from that. Right. And it's not just about like advocating, but it is, how do I use this art in a dangerous way? If you have not read Create Dangerously, that is an essay that is a part of a larger book that I think every First Wave artist should be reading. But it is, what are the stakes of your art? Right. Really evaluating that. And so I think First Wave made me really evaluate, what do I want to do and what do I want to be? And how do I want to do it in a way that is in alignment with my liberatory goals for myself and my people? And so I've been looking at the community as a possible organizing hub. And the challenges that I know as an organizer from these different grassroots organizations are very similar to what I went through in First Wave, and the intra-community challenges and gifts that come up and how we grow each other and how we struggle together physically and artistically, right? So I think my journey was really finding where I fit and seeing like, oh, these are where the dots connect for me. And it was less about a particular form, because I'm a writer, right? So I have a film, I have plays, and I'm working on a series right now. For me, it's about, how does the story, what is the form, the container for the story that is best for it, right? And so when I took off the like, I need to be this kind of artist to be in this program, it allowed me to, one, grow in various forms, but to also look at all of this as vehicle. It's vehicle. So how do I make the call? Who am I making the call for? How can they hear it? Right? What does this community need? What is this demographic? How do they respond? Okay, theater, because it already has witness built in. Spoken word already has a witness built in, community built in to its actual structure, right? And then like, oh, well, this is more easily digestible as a series. So thinking in that way and expanding how we use the vehicle of writing to be the genesis of our liberation, right? And think about that as cultural work. We're all cultural workers in some way, according to Bambara, right? She says, like, either you're working for the status quo, you may know it, you may not, right? Like, everyone's working for some culture, but knowing and being intentional about that, I think, through my journey at UW-Madison has really helped clarify what I say yes to and what I say no to, right? Just the alignment with my freedom goals.
Word. Beautiful, Erika.
Listen, I feel like after every assertion, there needs to be a hard stop, and we could just all leave. That's what.
Can I ask Erika a question though?
Sure.
Because I'm interested in this notion of the cultural worker, right? Because I think it relates to this idea. Like, I can only attribute the quote to Darius Simpson, who was a brilliant poet, but he was quoting his professor. Don't know the professor's name. Forgive me. But talking about the role of like putting revolutionary first in like whatever it is you do, right? So like the fact that we need revolutionary dancers, revolutionary poets, revolutionary whatever it is your occupation is, right? I'm wondering for you, was there a moment where you learned to put that cultural worker hat first front? And like, so I am a cultural worker who does playwriting, who does give a writing. And how, I'm wondering if you noticed, just so we can hear for the folks in the room, how did you see your art change once you put that hat forward?
I love you, boo. Yeah. Let's go back. Love them. I love them. So I went to Walter Payton College Preparatory High School. If you're not familiar with Chicago, that was a selective enrollment school that you can test in science, math, and language. Hated it. Left and got a full ride to go to the Chicago Academy for the Arts, which was a private art school. I was in the media arts department, which was writing and film. I was the only Black writer. And then there were 2 young women who came in 2 years after me who joined the film side of the department. And all of my professors were white. It was the best educational experience I had being at that particular institution. But in terms of our department, they had me reading mostly white poets. And so once we got into the negritude movement, I was like, once you read about negritude and understand how Black revolutionary movement artistically are working beyond the confines of the United States and its territories, it opened me. And I was like, you can do that? Because I love me some Sharon Olds and write about flowers and sex, but there has to be something else. There has to be something else, right? Like, I am a Black queer girl in this all-white department. Everybody mistakes me as a dancer at this school because I'm a Black girl. And they're like, you're in the dance department, right? Because I'm like, no, I'm actually in the media arts department, right? And so once I started reading just the poets of the negritude movement, and I discovered Black dialectical writing via Zora Neale Hurston, I was like, I can actually build language, or as Mamazaki would say, bend the language and use them for my own tools, right? Like, essentially. And it's like, I started writing radical pieces about race. Which I think is what a lot of global majority member youth do. It's like, you discover like, there's a word for this thing that I'm experiencing. And you start writing about it. But then I started reading the histories. I think one of the things I hoped for and I started doing that really changed me was learning the political histories of the people's work I was reading, right? So when I learned that Lorraine Hansberry, who went to this school, right, who was also from Chicago, who went to New York, actually was a journalist for the Freedom Paper. When I read about her organizing work, when I read about her writing outside of the context or the confines of plays, I understand her creative work better, right? When I read about how artists in Haiti started to perform plays that reflected their political challenges at the time and how that was actually dangerous for them because they're redoing these Shakespeare plays to make a statement to each other in the basements and in houses about what's going on in their political lives and what is possible for them in terms of how to respond, right? How to create their future. I was like, so this is not just about nice words and clever rhymes and like, I am oppressed. Like, I'm supposed to actually be doing something. And so I was like, I got to get in movement. And so that for me is why I keep coming back to organizing, because we can write in our solitude and individually, but it is within community that I realized all of the artists that I looked up to who were in movement work were building in community.
Right.
And I was like, oh, I gotta go get community. And that changed me, because then I met poets who, and was in Young Chicago Authors, and met poets who would challenge me, and was getting up every Saturday morning for 3.5 years on Saturdays to go to class with Avery Al Young and Krista Franklin and Tony Asante Lightfoot and Idris Goodwin, who was the first playwright professor I ever had. So I think that for me is how it came through community, but studying the revolutionary histories behind the artists who were doing more than just creating work.
Right. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I think that, thank you, Danez, for that question too, because I think that that's a great opportunity to take a couple of questions. I'm looking at the interest of time. I know that someone who has a burning question that they might want to ask our artists, activists, scholars up here.
And if you raise your hand, I can come around with a mic.
Okay.
Don't be shy, because I don't know when next time I'm coming to Madison, to be honest.
I'm taking advantage while they're here.
Y'all better pay her.
I just want to ask, because I think that slavery created a fetishization of the Black body in a constant state of strain and work. And as we talk about revolution, and as we talk about heightening the conversation intellectually, we have to talk about how pleasure is radical for Black queer people. And so where do you make space for pleasure within your writing? And how do you tell that story of Black joy? And how do we remember that that's radical too?
Right. This is a complicated answer for me, because I'm actually writing about against the concept of Black joy right now. In a lot of ways, I feel like it's also started to get commodified a little bit, right? That Black happiness, that Black girl magic, Black boy joy, I think they're becoming commercial, or have become commercial. And so I have a lot of questions about how we write joy. But it's important for us to see ourselves in like you're saying, in pleasure, in joy. I think that was a big moment of writing for me. I think so many of us start writing or creating as an act of catharsis, right? So it took a long time for me to actually learn how to write when I was happy, or how to witness happy moments and capture that. And it took time. I think right now I feel like in my personal writing, I feel like there is an embrace of humor in my work. I love making people laugh. I love talking about the beauty that I see in my community and in my people and in myself and in my relationships and in my sex and all these other things, right? And it's important for us to capture that, right? I think it's important for me as a non-binary Black HIV positive person to talk about how I'm happy and how I'm in love and how I love, and how I expect to live and how I expect to live a good life, right? And so, but also I think I get a lot of pleasure from compersion, right? Compersion meaning getting pleasure from other people's pleasure, right? And so one project that I love, so I work with this organization called True Art Speaks back home in Minneapolis, and one thing that we did, looking at, there were so many giveaways for resources, folks giving away food and just housing supplies and stuff like that in Minnesota, and we looked at that and said, what's missing? And so we started doing this thing called the Village Project, right, which was about filling in these sort of spiritual and bodily needs. So just popping up on the north side of Minneapolis and giving out tea, free yoga, haircuts, books, bus passes, links to mental health, right? And so thinking about all these things that gave us wellness, right? Inviting children's storytellers, inviting, folks that were just there to make the community smile, give them something that would help them take care of themselves, be there for their spirits back home. And so that was a thing of pleasure for me too, right? That we don't always have, that activism doesn't always mean protest, right? That activism does not always mean resistance, right? It also means adding to the wellness and to the goodness of people's lives, right? Not just being reactionary, but being preventative, but being foundational by building people up, right? And so that was the thing, that was a really transformational moment for me, right? Just in my activism, being we don't just, if we're only out in the streets after somebody's been killed, we're doing something wrong, right? If we're only out in the streets when we're trying to shout down something, we're doing something wrong. We also need to be in these streets on the calm days, just loving on each other, right? And that was a real shifting moment, I think. That was, that's what I felt like throwing my money behind, right? And I was just cool. And it was a wonderful moment to think about, we need people to think about this all the time, right? We need those movement workers that are thinking about how we fight for our lives. But we also need the ones who are thinking about how we love on ourselves, how we have peace.
Right? And I think those are synonymous for me. How I fight for my life is how I fight for the future and of my life and the world that I want to live in. And so in crafting that future, Black struggle is Black joy. When we are doing it well, when we are fighting for lives and it's not just the death. It's like, do Black lives matter while we're still alive, right? And how do we organize around principles of pleasure that remember our radical history of pleasure? Like the civil rights movement was like a direct action. It would be 45 minutes of the direct action, and then it's music in the street. It's a Block Club party. And I grew up in the era of Block Club parties, right? And so I don't know any other way. It's so embedded that this new co-optation of Black joy that is supposed to be synonymous with no struggle or no negative things, which I'm like, but we Black in America, like how that work? That it's like, oh no, you're forgetting that we already have it. It's about remembering and recalling, right? And pleasure within our sexual selves. Like, you read Elaine Brown's biography, which I think everyone should, because I am in the running to adapt that into a film.
You gotta get that
job. But her biography, A Taste of Power, you'd be like, she was fucking everybody. How you like, you know what I'm saying? But like having Black radical women be deeply in their sexual pleasure and also make time for parties and kicking it with friends or getting a manicure or taking an herbal bath because that helps regulate your nervous system. Like, it's there already. And so how do we bring out what we are already in the legacy of, right? Without allowing it to be commercialized and turned into something that is actually not radical, that is actually just about turning from what's happening. It's about distraction, and it's about like, oh, I don't want to deal with that. Right. So like for me, Black joy is inherent in my work because we'll go from crying in one scene to cracking up in another. My people from New Orleans, it's like we have a funeral and then we have a party. Like it's just
y'all be dancing at the funeral.
From the cemetery, you cry going to the cemetery, you play the funeral dirge, and then then it's a second line. So for me, it is in the culture already. It's about remembering what we already know that we have forgotten that we know.
So we're out of time, but I want to leave us with this last question. As we think about art and its impact throughout our histories, throughout our culture, throughout the diaspora, art has been such this powerful medium for promoting and creating and producing change. And so I want to start with Professor Walker here. What is it about the arts that makes it such a powerful medium for change?
Wow. I think we heard already through Danez's answer, speaking to hip hop as a culture, hip hop as a creative activity, as an artistic activity, ends up being Ghana hip hop, Cuba hip hop, Nigerian hip hop, everywhere you can think of it, where they are oppressed people, they've been able to use this form to express themselves. What is that? Rex Netterford also, in his research, looks at that wherever people are oppressed, the response is a collective creative response, right? So oftentimes people expect that Irish dance, right? I mean, the lower body moving as a way of speaking to that from another cultural space, right? That the response is often a creative response. My work is asking why that is so, right? And it seems to come back down to the body and expression and trying to answer questions about why we're even here in the first place, right? So this Big Bang happened, and that energy from that Big Bang, those particles created that essence of life that we all have in us, right? Plants, animals, right? Everything that moves and grows on our planet is coming from that same source. And we look at the cultural traditions that I'm from, West African cultural traditions, we're asking those same questions from that time, from that first bang, that first energy. So when I look at you, I'm seeing that energy in you, right? Which we now call God. So I'm seeing that God in you, seeing that God in you. And so art is the way that we take that God's source, and bring that out. It allows us to connect and make sense of things in a way that our everyday limited forms of communication and expression don't allow for it. And so come out in poetry, come out in movement, it come out in music, come out in drawing, come out in these ways that we're able to speak to larger issues that extend beyond what we may think of as the uniqueness of the individual experience, and back to that Big Bang source, right? Because those are the commonalities of the human experience. And so, Asada, who is in the 14th course of First With Me, write something that resonates so deeply with me. Our families are from two different cultures. We're from two different generations. We're from two different time, but in this time, right? She's able to speak to things that connect with me, that probably connect with you, that probably connect with other folks in the room. And that's, at least for me, I'm understanding that as the role of the arts. But then there's the individual part of it that centers one in their identity. So whether you think you create art or not, your relationship with art is an affirmation of who you are as an individual in relation to this larger collective, right? It affirms also, because your interpretation of art is so yours, it reaffirms the power of that voice, right? Wow. Otherwise, societies without art, I don't know what that looks like, but I would imagine a sort of lemming type of behavior, because now you're told how to read, you're told how to interpret, you're told how to see. Right? Versus being able to look at something, 10 people in a room, and come away with 10 different interpretations of that, and each of them being valid. Right? The prism. So for me, art allows for the individual to stand taller in their understanding of who they are. And that is only possible when it then connects back.
I'm not going after you.
To the group and community. Of course, we can't talk about it. You want to go in there, we'll go sit over there.
I'm telling you, I'm trying to sign up with Erika's class. No, but I think for real, sit at this woman's feet, for real. I think for me, I'm thinking about what Erika has said about, or has brought into the room for us about art as genesis for movement. I'm thinking, like Chris just say, like, what is society without art? I'm recognizing the danger of art. We have a luxury being an artist in America. I think about how many artists are persecuted in the countries they come from, right? And it's because I think the reason why art is so integral to activism is because it's the freest space of imagination, right? It's harder to imagine in this tangible world, right? But on the page, in my body, in the film, whatever my medium is, I can dream, right? And I can pass that dreaming on to my people. And so if I can imagine, if we know that speaking out is dangerous, maybe it's okay first in the poem before I actually say it in the courthouse, right? If I know that imagination is powerful, then I can imagine where we're going, that liberation, and then we can take the real steps about how to get there. If I can show you what's possible, if I can show you where we're heading, right? If I can imagine the space in which we are free, then maybe we can actually make our steps there, right? And so that's why I think art is so powerful, is that it shows us the first possibility free of the constrictions of the actual world. And once we show that to the people, once we have that seed of the imagination, then that's the genesis. Then we all work to make that dream reality.
Wow. You ready to go sit over there? I'll stay here with you, Erika.
Thank you. I love that. All right, 3 things, because some of us hungry. I don't know, women with dogs, Montana. I hope he okay. 3 things. I think that art helps us, facilitates us becoming internationalists. What I mean by that is internationalists politically. I'm always speaking politically because I think the center of our everything is our integrity and our politics. It informs everything else, right? And the way I see that, I think about how the Palestinians living under a police state taught us how to heal from being tear gassed during the Michael Brown uprising era. And then I think about how that made us be like, oh, wait, we're both living under police states. and how the art that comes out of Palestine, I had the privilege of being in Israel and Palestine for a few weeks a few years ago, and learned so much about the work the artists there were doing that is not unlike the work that we're doing here in our very specific geopolitical context. And then I learned about Turkey and how the Turkish are living under a police state. And it's like, oh, you too? And y'all look very different than us and the Palestinians. Like, oh, wow. Let's talk about imperialism. Let's talk about neocolonialism. Let's talk about what it is to live under a police state and how our art is connecting us. You found me through this poem. I found you through this play. Wow. And so we get to become internationalists in that way. I think the second thing is that art, I'm really trying to be careful with my language here. Art makes you honest. Art makes us really honest when we're doing it right. It makes us really, really honest. And so we get to see ourselves and each other more clearly. We get to see where we're falling short politically. How our politics may not be translating in our praxis, and what we might need to be doing differently, how big or how small we're thinking, how narrow or how wide we're envisioning our liberation, how big or how small our imagination is, or if our imagination is still colonized, right? Your art will tell you that. It will show you. Some shit I made years ago that I look back at, I was like, oh, I'm glad you grew. I'm glad you grew. And then the third thing, I think about our elders and I speak their names and their words often because we are here to challenge and continue their political lives and the politics that they espouse. So I go back to Tony K. Bambara, who said, poets are community health workers. They call us something higher than a fish sandwich and a job. Not there's anything wrong with a fish sandwich or a job, right? Hopefully we will in capitalism and we won't have to work, but I think about what it means to be community health workers as artists, to call people to something higher. Professor Robin Kelly, in his book, The Black Radical Imagination, has this quote in his introduction where he talks about, and he's not a poet, but he talks about how poets can imagine what color the sky is, essentially when organizers can't see it. That poets can still imagine the color of the sky and tell us what the color of the sky is. And so for me, art allows us to be able to see beyond what people who are not artists can. We get to imagine the color of the sky and tell people what color it is and say, see it with me this way. Can you see that? Can I help you see that? Right? And so it's that for me. I think those three things, the honesty, right? What color is the sky? And imagine that with me, right? The reclaiming of imagination, which is a byproduct of colonialism, like a spoil of colonialism, as Adrienne Marie Brown, the good sis Adrienne would say, and then allows us to be internationalists. Yes. So yeah.
Listen. I know Mackenzie and Sophia are going to kill us. We are way over time, but I can't imagine a better panel of experienced, brilliant scholar, activist practitioners to help us. To help get us in focus, right? And so thank you all for joining us. Listen, I should have been sitting down there the entire time. I thoroughly enjoyed this. I learned, I grew tonight.
I think next year we need Erika's line breaks lecture.
Please.
Thank you, LaVar.
I only have gratitude for all of you, to be clear. Please join me in thanking all of our panelists here this evening. Thank you. Thank you as well to some of our guests who came out tonight. Thank you to Provost Schultz for joining us here this evening and for all of your great work. and everyone for coming out. Before we conclude here, and I will be here for a little bit, so please enjoy the reception, I want to express my great thanks to our program partner. I'm almost getting emotional. Sophia Snow, the director of the Office of Multicultural Arts Initiatives and the First Wave Learning Program and Community on campus. Sophia is really, we've been partnering and dreaming this for about 2 years. It's wonderful to have it come through and be real and to be with all of you. And she's really the driving force behind bringing so many of these esteemed panelists here and the weekend, which she's going to tell you a little bit more about. So Sophia, can you come on up? Thank you.
Oh, Mackenzie, thank you. Shout out to Mackenzie and the Wisconsin Alumni Association. Much love to half of our panel who's running to go backstage to the thing I'm about to talk to you about. This year's Line Breaks, like Mackenzie said, has been 2 years in the making. It was first a dream when I first came back to Madison from New York, hanging out with Erika. As director and as a member of the first cohort, it truly meant the world to me. It's one of the greatest honors of my life. And so October 2019, I was like, yeah, this Line Breaks is going to be crazy. And 3 weeks out, it was canceled. It was great. But Mackenzie was actually one of the first people I reached out to plan this big multicultural arts alumni weekend. And I'm so grateful to Mackenzie and to Carla Foster for sticking in with the dream and for making this possible. But that being said, we got a whole show going on downstairs. If you go down to the lower level at the Playhouse, we are sold out. Make some noise for that. So if you're here and you actually register for the show, you'll want to go downstairs before seats are released at 7. So there's that. But for other folks, at 7, seats will be released. So there's that. We have an incredible evening showcase. We have the first-year scholars of the First Wave program, the 14th cohort, debuting a brand new work that they've worked in collaboration under the facilitation of Professor Chris Walker. You have now heard how Chris Walker thinks and works. You're going to want to see their show. We also have a work by 12th cohort member, junior of our program, Jax Neal, called Enter Axiom. It's giving you research-based art making, interdisciplinary art. There's video, there's dance, there's poetry. You won't want to miss it. And last but certainly not least tonight, there is a work in progress in collaboration with Professor Chris Walker and Danez Smith, a choreo poem, a staging of their epic poem, Summer Somewhere. The cast includes cohorts 1 through 14 of alumni and current students. That's tonight. So if you didn't register, it's all good. Just make sure you get downstairs by 7 p.m., okay? Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you.